Greetings again! Now we're going to talk about vertebrate animals that include fish, amphibians, and reptiles. Remember, animals that are vertebrates are simply animals with a backbone. Vertebrates have an endoskeleton, which means it offers support and protects the soft parts of the animal. It's a skeleton on the inside. Vertebrates can either be ectotherms or endotherms. Ectotherms are cold-blooded. Their body temperature changes to match their surroundings. And endotherms are warm-blooded. They regulate their body temperature so that it remains constant. Vertebrate animals fall into the chordate phylum. The chordate phylum is divided into classes: fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. We'll talk about birds and mammals next. So here are your chordates, your vertebrates. Fish, amphibians, and reptiles is what we're going to mainly focus on today. Fish are cold-blooded animals. This means that their blood temperature changes with the temperature of the surrounding water. They are ectotherms. Most fish live close to the shore in water that is less than 600 feet deep. In the ocean, the deeper the water, the dimmer the light. Many fish who live at 2,000 feet or deeper glow in the dark. All fish have gills. These gills absorb oxygen from the water and pass it along to the bloodstream. A fish's scales are called armor because they protect it. A slimy substance moistens the scales. This protects the fish from infection and helps the fish slip through the water faster. Fish stay afloat because they have swim bladders. By changing the amount of air in its bladder, a fish never rises or sinks, but stays balanced. Fins move the fish forward, steer it, and help the fish to keep its balance. The pectoral and pelvic fins are used for balance, steering, and braking. The dorsal fin keeps the fish from rolling over and works along the anal fin. The tail or caudal fin provides power, thrusting the fish forward. Fish are actually divided into 3 different classes: bony fish, cartilaginous fish, and jawless fish. Bony fish make up 95% of all fish. Their skeletons are made up of, you guessed it, bone. Their scaly skin is covered with a slimy mucus, and their mouth is generally at the front of their body. They have a tail fin. Cartilaginous fish include the sharks, skates, and rays. Although these look different, they have many features in common. None of them have any true bone. Their skeleton is made entirely of cartilage, and they have really strong jaws. Their mouth is on the underside of their body, and their eyes are on top of their body. They cannot see food as it enters their mouth. Some sharks solve this problem by touching their food briefly with their nose first. Some also use a powerful electrosensory system. This is a primitive eel-like fish, which doesn't have a true jaw, but a sucker-like mouth, like suction cups, and rasping teeth. There are 2 main types of jawless fish: the lampreys, which are found in freshwater lakes, and the hagfish, which are blind eels, and they're found only in saltwater and feed mainly on dead fish. Now let's move on to amphibians. We love these little guys. They have smooth skin, and they spend at least part of their life in water. Amphibians are cold-blooded, so they hibernate in the winter. They usually have 3 life stages: egg, larva, and adult, because they go through metamorphosis. Think about summertime. If you have a ditch near your house and it rains a lot, what usually starts going in there? Little tadpoles, and they metamorphosize really quickly, especially if that drain is about ready to dry up. So frogs, toads, salamanders, and newts, they're all amphibians. So what's the difference between a frog and a toad? Well, a frog has smooth, moist skin, whereas a toad has rough, drier skin. And the frog doesn't have warts on its body, whereas the toad does. Narrow body and waist for a frog, whereas the toad has a broader, flatter body. And the frogs have to live near or in water, whereas the toads can live on land but breed only in the water. Now the frogs have longer hind legs for hopping and webbed hind feet for swimming, but the toads have shorter hind legs and they walk rather than hop. And the frogs have eggs in massive lumps of cloudy jelly, whereas the toad eggs are long and stringy and they're wrapped around water plants. Well, here's a quick overview of metamorphosis. You can see the eggs hatch into tadpoles a few days after they're fertilized externally in the water. Then, those tadpoles gradually grow limbs and lose their tails and gills and become meat eaters as they develop into terrestrial adults. Then they become young frogs and then adult frogs. I remember my kids got some tadpoles, we put them in a bowl, and we watched them metamorphosize. Well, one day we came home from grocery shopping, and there was this little metamorphosized, still had its tail, but it had its back legs, like you see in the picture. Little guy, he had hopped from the kitchen counter to the floor. Talk about craziness. Brave little fella. So, amphibians. That means a double life, because they live both in water and on land. Most of their larvae are like fish. The adults, though, are terrestrial carnivores. They live on land, and they eat mainly bugs. The larvae respire through skin and gills, whereas the adults use lungs. They're the descendants of ancestral organisms that evolved some, not all, adaptations for life on land, and they first appeared 360 million years ago. They all do external fertilization, and they have a closed circulatory system with a 3-chambered heart. So here are your groups of amphibians. Salamanders, which have long bodies and tails. The adults are carnivorous, and they usually live in moist woods. Frogs and toads do not have tails, and they have long legs that are usually tied to water. Toads have shorter legs, and they're not as closely tied to water. Caecilians are legless animals that burrow in moist soil, and they have fish-like scales, like this little guy in the picture. Now let's talk about reptiles. These animals have dry, scaly skin. They are ectothermic, cold-blooded, and they hibernate in the winter, just like the amphibians. Some live in the water, but most are adapted to life on land. Most reptiles lay soft-shelled eggs, but some bear live young. Some snakes have eggs, and some give birth to live young. So, reptiles includes lizards, snakes, turtles, and crocodilians. Did you know that snakes smell with their tongue? You probably did. All reptiles have dry, scaly skin that prevents water loss of body water in dry environments. They have terrestrial eggs, and they were the first animals to develop amniotic eggs that didn't need to be deposited in water. Reptiles respire using lungs, and they go through internal fertilization. Most are leg-aying. They're ectotherms, which means they cannot internally regulate their body temperature, and they can't live in cold climates. A few years ago, when it got really cold, I remember I was out running, and I saw this poor little lizard frozen, dead on the sidewalk, because they're ectothermic. They lose body heat. That's why you'll see crocodiles laying on a rock, because they want that warmth from the sun. They do have a closed circulatory system, and their heart has 2 atria and 1 or 2 ventricles, kind of like our hearts. So our reptiles are the lizards and snakes, which have legs and clawed toes, external ears, and movable eyelids. They're highly specialized forms, like venom. Crocodiles and alligators are long and typically have a broad snout and squat appearance. They're all carnivorous. They're protective of their young, and they carry their little hatchlings in their mouth. So sweet. They live in the tropics and subtropics, and alligators live in freshwater. Crocodiles, though, can live in fresh or salt water. Finally, your turtles and tortoises. They're all shelled, and the turtles are aquatic. The tortoises are terrestrial. The Tatara is the primitive reptiles found on small, remote islands. So there's lots of diversity out there. Fish, amphibians, and reptiles. Next, we'll talk about birds and mammals.